Verified incident logs. Authentic footage. Pure accountability. Welcome to Bodycam Incident Reports.
Step away from the car, now!
I'm paying a parking meter, that's not a crime.
Don't test me, I need your ID.
You don't have cause. You're crossing a line.
I decide where the line is.
No, officer. The Constitution does.
The command didn't come as a question. It was a bark sharp and aggressive cutting through the humid afternoon air of downtown Atlanta. The street was alive with the sounds of the city tires humming on asphalt, the distant rhythm of a jackhammer, and the low murmur of pedestrians enjoying a sunny Tuesday lunch hour. But inside the bubble of tension that had just formed on the corner of Peachtree and 10th, everything went silent. Officer Kyle Vance stood with his hand resting dangerously close to his holster, his chest puffed out, eyes concealed behind mirrored aviator sunglasses. At 29 years old, Vance still carried the physical bulk of a former high school linebacker, but his posture betrayed something more volatile than athleticism. It was the posture of a man who believed his badge granted him dominion over everyone he encountered. A man who viewed the citizens of his precinct not as people to serve, but as subjects to control. Vance had been on this force for 6 years, a tenure marked by a troubling pattern that the department had managed to bury under the guise of proactive policing. His file was thick with complaints, 14 of them to be exact. 11 of those complaints involved allegations of racial profiling, aggressive language, or unconstitutional stops of black men. He was known in the locker room as a hunter, a term some of the older, more cynical officers used with a wink. Vance didn't patrol, he prowled. He looked for trouble where there was none confident that if he shook a tree hard enough, something criminal would fall out. Today, the tree he decided to shake was standing calmly next to a silver 2024 Mercedes-Benz S-Class. "I said step away from the meter," Vance shouted again, closing the distance between them with long, heavy strides. "Hands where I can see them." The man at the meter didn't flinch. He didn't jump, he didn't run, and he didn't look afraid. He simply finished turning the dial on the parking meter, listened for the mechanical click of the coin dropping, and then slowly turned to face the shouting officer. Elias Thorne was a mountain of a man, even at 62 years old. Standing 6'3" with shoulders that still spanned a doorframe, he wore a charcoal gray bespoke suit that cost more than Officer Vance made in a month. His tie was silk, a deep maroon perfectly knotted against a crisp white shirt. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine reflecting the midday sun. But it was his face that held the real power, weather-beaten, etched with lines of deep experience, and eyes that held a calm, terrifying stillness. "I heard you the first time, officer," Thorne said. His voice was a deep baritone steady as bedrock. It was the voice of a man who had issued commands that sent thousands of men into battle, not a man used to being barked at by a 20-something with an ego problem. "There is no need to shout. I am simply paying for parking." To Kyle Vance, this calmness was not a sign of innocence. It was a sign of arrogance. In Vance's distorted worldview, a black man, any black man standing next to a $130,000 car in a high-end district was suspicious. If he wasn't the driver, he was a thief. If he was the driver, he was probably a drug dealer or a fraudster. And if he wasn't afraid of the police, he was definitely hiding something. "I didn't ask you what you were doing," Vance sneered, stepping into Thorne's personal space, a tactic taught to intimidate. He could smell the faint, expensive scent of sandalwood and old leather on the older man, which only irritated him more. "I told you to step away. We've got reports of people tampering with meters in this area, and loitering. You fit the description." There was no report of tampering. There was no description. Vance was improvising as he had done dozens of times before. He was fishing for a reaction, waiting for the man to get angry, to curse, to make a sudden move. Anything that would justify what Vance wanted to do next. Thorne looked down at the officer, his expression unreadable. "I fit the description of a man paying for parking, officer. I have an appointment in 10 minutes. I have placed 2 quarters in this meter." That is the extent of my activity here. Don't get smart with me, pal. Vance snapped his finger, twitching near his belt. You're detained. And until I figure out why you're really standing next to a car that clearly doesn't belong to you, you aren't going anywhere. Vance had no idea who he was talking to. He saw a stereotype. He didn't see the silver star pin on Thorne's lapel. He didn't see the scars on the man's hands from shrapnel in Somalia. He didn't see the discipline of a command sergeant major who had retired after 35 years of distinguished service in the United States Army Rangers. Officer Vance thought he was catching a criminal. In reality, he was walking into a buzzsaw. To understand the gravity of the mistake Officer Vance was making, one had to understand the history standing inside that charcoal suit. Elias Thorne was not merely a retiree enjoying a Tuesday afternoon. He was a living institution. Born in a segregated hospital in Alabama in the early 1960s, Thorne had learned the value of discipline and dignity from a father who laid bricks and a mother who taught school. He enlisted in the Army at 18, seeking a way out and a way up. He found more than a career. He found a calling. The Ranger Creed, "I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy," became the DNA of his existence. He had earned his Ranger tab in the mud and misery of Fort Benning when he was just 19. By 30, he was a platoon sergeant. He had jumped into Panama during Operation Just Cause, surviving a firefight that claimed two of his best friends. In Mogadishu during the chaos of 1993, that the world would come to know through movies, Thorne was there on the ground dragging a wounded pilot to safety while taking a bullet to the shoulder, an injury that still ached when it rained like it had earlier that morning. He had served tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, rising to the rank of Command Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank a soldier can achieve. He was the man generals consulted when they needed to know the truth about the morale of the troops. He was the man who ensured that thousands of young soldiers came home alive. When he retired 5 years ago, he didn't stop serving. He moved to Atlanta and began working tirelessly on veterans advocacy, using his connections and his commanding presence to secure housing and mental health funding for those the system had forgotten. Today, Elias Thorne was not loitering. He was 30 minutes early for a lunch meeting with Mayor Franklin and the City Council regarding the construction of a new rehabilitation center for disabled veterans. The Mercedes S-Class was a retirement gift to himself, paid for with decades of saved combat pay and wise investments. He had arrived early because Elias Thorne was never late. "If you're on time, you're late," he used to tell his troops. He had parked on the street because the garage was full. He had walked to the meter because he believed in following the law down to the letter. He had a handicap placard in his glove box that legally allowed him to park for free at metered spots in the city, a concession for his service-connected disabilities, but Thorne rarely used it. He preferred to pay his way. He didn't like handouts, even the ones he was entitled to. So he had fished 2 quarters out of his pocket, inserted them, and checked the time. That was the moment Officer Vance's patrol car had screeched to a halt. Thorne looked at the young officer and felt a familiar cold disappointment. He had fought for this country for 3.5 decades. He had bled for the Constitution that this boy was treating like a suggestion. He had seen young men like Vance before in uniform in war zones. They were the dangerous ones, the ones who loved the power of the rifle but lacked the discipline of the mission. In a combat zone, men like Vance got their squads killed. On the streets of Atlanta, they destroyed communities. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, a tone he used to use to dress down chaotic lieutenants. "I am going to ask you to take a breath and reassess this situation. You are making an assumption based on optics, and it is an incorrect one." "I don't need a lecture from the likes of you," Vance spat back. "I need ID now." "I have broken no law," Thorne stated calmly. "Under Georgia law, unless you have reasonable articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime, am committing a crime, or am about to commit a crime, I am not required to present identification. Paying for a parking meter is not a crime. It wasn't defiance. It was a lesson. Thorne was trying to give the boy an off-ramp a chance to walk away with his career intact. But Vance was too blinded by the reflection in his own sunglasses to see the cliff he was driving off. Unknown to Thorne, the poison in Vance's ear hadn't just come from his own prejudice. It had started 3 minutes earlier with a phone call from across the street. Directly across the street from where Thorne stood behind the display window of Gantry's Rare Antiquities stood Preston Gantry. At 45, Gantry was a man who considered himself the unspoken guardian of the neighborhood's aesthetic. He dealt in 18th-century French furniture and colonial silverware, catering to a clientele that was exclusively wealthy and overwhelmingly white. Gantry had been watching the street when the silver Mercedes pulled up. He saw the car first. Beautiful, sleek, expensive. A car that belonged in front of his shop. But when the door opened and Elias Thorne stepped out, Gantry's expression soured. He didn't see a retired war hero. He didn't see a potential customer. Gantry saw a threat. He saw a large black man in a neighborhood that Gantry felt was changing too fast. He watched Thorne walk to the meter and pause, checking his pockets for change. "Look at this," Gantry muttered to no one, his hands tightening on the velvet curtain he was adjusting. "Probably casing the sedan, or trying to jam the meter to steal coins. They're getting bolder every day." It was a ludicrous thought. Who would wear a $3,000 suit to steal quarters from a parking meter? But prejudice is rarely logical. It is a story the mind invents to justify hate. Gantry convinced himself in seconds that Thorne was a criminal element. He grabbed the phone behind his counter and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Yes, this is Preston Gantry, owner of Gantry's Antiquities on Peachtree. I need an officer here immediately. There's a suspicious individual loitering outside my shop. Is he threatening anyone, sir? The dispatcher asked. He's aggressive. Gantry lied, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He's wandering around a luxury vehicle tampering with the parking meter. He looks like he's trying to break into the car. He's been out there for 20 minutes just watching people. It's making my customers uncomfortable. Thorne had been there for less than 2 minutes. Description: African-American male, large build, very large. He looks like he could be armed. He's got his hands in his pockets, looking around nervously. Please send someone before he smashes a window or hurts someone. We have a unit around the corner, sir. Officer Vance is responding. Gantry hung up the phone with a satisfied smirk. He felt powerful. He had done his part to keep the neighborhood safe. He watched through the glass as Officer Vance's cruiser whipped around the corner and slammed on the brakes. He watched Vance storm out. He watched the confrontation begin. Get him, Gantry whispered, rubbing his hands together. He didn't care about the truth. He only cared about the removal of the man who didn't fit his picture of the world. He wanted Thorne gone humiliated and put in his place. From his air-conditioned vantage point, Gantry watched the scene unfold like a play he had directed. He saw the officer shouting. He saw the black man standing his ground. Gantry frowned. Why isn't he cowering? Why isn't he running? The lack of fear in the suspect made Gantry nervous. It made him feel like perhaps he had miscalculated. But it was too late now. The machinery of the state had been activated, and it was rolling forward with crushing weight. Back on the sidewalk, the air was crackling with static energy. Officer Vance's face was flushing a deep red, the color of anger and embarrassment. He was used to fear. He was used to people stammering, apologizing, and handing over their wallets with shaking hands. Elias Thorne's absolute concrete stillness was infuriating him. I'm going to tell you one more time. Vance said, his hand unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. He didn't draw the firearm, but the threat was unmistakable. ID now, or you're going for a ride. Thorne looked at the officer's hand on the weapon. He calculated the distance, the stance, the reaction time. In his prime, Thorne could have disarmed Vance, stripped the weapon, and had the boy on his stomach in under 3 seconds. Even now, with his stiff shoulder, he knew he could end the physical threat. But Elias Thorne operated under a code of honor, and more importantly, he knew that fighting a police officer physically was a death sentence for a black man in America, regardless of the truth. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice hard as flint, "you are escalating a consensual encounter into a detention without probable cause. I have told you this is my vehicle. I am adding time to the meter. If you run the plates, you will see the vehicle is registered to Elias Thorne. That is me." "I'm not running anything until I have your license in my hand," Vance shouted, stepping closer. "And how do I know you didn't steal the keys? How do I know you aren't just the driver waiting for the boss?" "The boss?" Thorne raised an eyebrow. The insult was so petty, so archaic. "I am the boss, son, and I suggest you lower your voice before you say something you cannot take back." "Don't call me son," Vance roared. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, show me 10 to 15 with one uncooperative male subject at Peachtree and 10th. Send backup. Subject is large, potentially hostile." "Hostile," Thorne repeated, shaking his head slowly. "I have not moved. I have not raised my voice. I have not threatened you. You are manufacturing a narrative to justify your own bias." "Turn around," Vance ordered, pulling his taser from his vest with his left hand while keeping his right near his gun. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest." "For what crime?" Thorne demanded, still not moving. "Failure to obey a lawful order, obstruction, disorderly conduct. Take your pick." Vance was making it up as he went along, throwing out charges like confetti, hoping one would stick. "Those are secondary charges," Thorne said, his mind working like a legal scholar. "You cannot arrest me for obstruction if there was no underlying crime to obstruct. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." "I don't care about your amendments right now. I care about my safety." Vance lied. He wasn't unsafe. He was insecure. "Your safety is not in danger," Thorne said, "but your career is." That broke the dam. Vance couldn't handle the intellectual dressing down. He couldn't handle the fact that this suspect was smarter, calmer, and more articulate than he was. He holstered the taser and lunged forward, grabbing Thorne's left wrist, the bad shoulder. Vance yanked the arm backward with excessive force, using a joint manipulation technique meant to inflict pain and force compliance. Thorne gasped a sharp intake of breath as white-hot pain shot through his rotator cuff, the old shrapnel wound screaming in protest. But he didn't fight back. He didn't pull away. He knew that any resistance, even a reflex to pain, would be written up as assault on an officer. "I am not resisting," Thorne said loudly, his voice straining through the pain. "I am complying. Do not hyperextend the shoulder." "Stop fighting me," Vance yelled for the benefit of the body camera, despite Thorne standing perfectly still. "Stop resisting." The metal cuffs bit into Elias Thorne's wrists with a cold, mechanical finality. Officer Vance didn't just apply them. He ratcheted them down tight, pinching the skin, twisting Thorne's arms high up his back to maximize the discomfort. By now, a crowd had gathered. The lunch rush was in full swing, and the spectacle of a white police officer manhandling an impeccably dressed elderly black man had stopped traffic on the sidewalk. Phones were out, dozens of them. The unblinking eyes of the digital age were recording every second. "Hey, take it easy on him," a woman in business attire shouted from near the bakery. "He wasn't doing anything." "Back up!" Vance screamed at the crowd, spinning Thorne around so forcefully that the older man stumbled slightly. "Back the hell up or you're next." A young man in a blue suit stepped forward, holding his phone high. "Officer, I'm an attorney. I've been watching for 5 minutes. He has complied with every order. You are using excessive force." "Did I ask for a lawyer?" Vance sneered, adrenaline flooding his system. He felt like a gladiator in the arena. "Walk away." Vance pushed Thorne toward the patrol car. Thorne walked with his head high despite the pain radiating from his shoulder and the tightness of the cuffs cutting into his circulation. He looked at the crowd not with shame, but with a gaze of intense, focused gravity. He locked eyes with the young lawyer filming him. "Record it all," Thorne said clearly. "Do not stop recording." "Shut up." Vance grunted, shoving Thorne against the side of the cruiser. He patted Thorne down roughly, his hands searching the pockets of the expensive suit. He pulled out a wallet. He didn't open it to check the ID yet. He just shoved it into his own pocket, treating it like evidence of a crime. He pulled out the car keys. "Into the car, too," Vance ordered, opening the back door. The space was cramped, a cage of hard plastic and metal mesh. Thorne paused before ducking his head. He turned to look Vance directly in the eyes. The sunglasses were inches apart. "Officer Vance," Thorne said, reading the nameplate on the uniform. "You have the authority to do this, but you do not have the right. You are about to destroy your life because you could not control your prejudice. Get in." Vance shoved him. Thorne's head bumped against the doorframe, a deliberate move by police known as a rough ride tactic, but Thorne absorbed the impact without a sound. He maneuvered his large frame into the back seat, his knees pressed against the partition. Vance slammed the door shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Inside the car, the air was stale and smelled of industrial cleaner and old sweat. Thorne sat in the dark, his hands numb behind his back. He closed his eyes for a moment, regulating his breathing. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. The combat breathing technique calmed his heart rate. He was a prisoner of war in his own country. It was a feeling he had feared he might one day experience, but had hoped his service would insulate him from. He was wrong. The uniform he had worn for 35 years meant nothing to Kyle Vance. The medals meant nothing. The rank meant nothing. All that mattered was the color of his skin. Vance jumped into the driver's seat, revving the engine aggressively. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch 1 in custody, transporting to precinct. Suspect was combative but is now secured. Tow the vehicle at the scene." Thorne opened his eyes. Tow the vehicle. They were going to impound his car. The pettiness was almost impressive. "You're making a mistake, son," Thorne said from the back, his voice calm. "I told you," Vance said, glancing in the rearview mirror with a smirk. "Don't call me son. You're just another thug in a suit to me." Thorne fell silent. There was nothing more to say to Kyle Vance. The time for talking was over. The time for judgment was coming. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. For Officer Vance, it was a victory lap. He blasted the air conditioning and hummed along to the radio, feeling the rush of a good bust. He was already mentally writing his report, phrasing it in the language of exoneration. Subject exhibited pre-assault cues. Subject bladed his stance. Subject refused lawful commands. He knew the buzzwords that made internal affairs investigations go away. For Elias Thorne, the drive was an intelligence-gathering mission. He stared out the window, memorizing the route. He noted Vance's driving reckless speeding without lights or sirens rolling through a stop sign. He listened to Vance's casual profanity on the phone with another officer. "Yeah, I got a big one. Thought he owned the block. Yeah, Mercedes. Probably a drug dealer's ride. We'll inventory it later, see what kind of cash is in the trunk." Thorne cataloged every word. He wasn't afraid. He was angry, a cold, focused, righteous anger that burned hotter than any fire. He thought about the men he had led. He thought about the boys who died in the desert so that people in Atlanta could have freedom. He thought about the irony of being treated like an enemy combatant in the city he helped build. They arrived at the precinct, a fortress of brick and concrete. Vance pulled into the sally port, the heavy garage doors rattling shut behind them. "Out," Vance ordered, opening the back door. He grabbed Thorne's arm again, hauling him out. Thorne's legs were stiff, but he stood tall. Vance marched him through the booking doors, pushing him toward the front desk. The station was busy. Officers were typing reports. Phones were ringing. The hum of bureaucracy was constant. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Thomas Kowalski. Kowalski was 58 years old, a relic of the old breed of police work. He had tired eyes and a mustache that had gone gray a decade ago. He was a Marine Corps veteran of the First Gulf War. He knew the streets and he knew his officers. He didn't like Vance. He thought Vance was a lawsuit waiting to happen. "What you got, Vance?" Kowalski asked, not looking up from his paperwork. "Disorderly obstruction resisting." Vance rattled off, pushing Thorne toward the bench. "Guy was checking meters casing cars. Refused ID, got aggressive." Kowalski looked up, his eyes scanning the suspect. He saw the suit, he saw the posture, he saw the face. Kowalski stopped chewing his gum. He squinted. He stood up slowly behind the desk. "Vance?" Kowalski said, his voice changing tone completely. "Bring him here." "I'm taking him to Holding Sarge. I gotta process him." "I said bring him here," Kowalski barked. Vance frowned, confused, but shoved Thorne toward the desk. Thorne looked at the sergeant. He saw the Marine Corps lapel pin on Kowalski's uniform shirt. "Semper Fi, Sergeant," Thorne said softly. Kowalski's eyes went wide. He looked at Thorne's face, then at the tattoo peeking out from the cuff of Thorne's shirt where the sleeve had ridden up during the struggle. It was a Ranger tab tattoo, faded but distinct. Then recognition hit Kowalski like a physical blow. He had seen this man's picture on the internal memo just that morning. He was the VIP guest speaker for the department's Veterans Day Gala. He was the man the chief of police was currently having lunch with, or supposed to be having lunch with. "Oh, dear God," Kowalski whispered. He looked at Vance with a mixture of pity and horror. "Vance, take the cuffs off." "What? No, he's under arrest. I have to print him." "Vance!" Kowalski shouted, slamming his hand on the desk, silencing the entire room. "Take the cuffs off right now. Do you have any idea who this is?" "He's a loiterer," Vance insisted, though a seed of doubt finally began to sprout in his gut. "This is Command Sergeant Major Elias Thorne, retired," Kowalski said, his voice trembling with rage. "He is a Silver Star recipient, and he is Chief Harrison's personal guest." Vance froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he might faint. He looked at the man he had manhandled. He looked at the thug in the suit. Thorne didn't smile. He just stared at Vance. "I tried to tell you, son." The silence in the precinct was shattered by the sound of the front doors bursting open. Chief of Police Marcus Harrison didn't walk in. He stormed in. Behind him was Mayor Franklin, looking equally flushed and furious. They had been waiting at the restaurant for 20 minutes. When Thorne didn't show, the mayor had called Thorne's cell phone. A bystander, the young lawyer, had answered it, having picked it up from the sidewalk where Vance had knocked it out of Thorne's hand. The lawyer had told the chief everything. "Where is he?" Chief Harrison roared. Kowalski pointed to the bench where Thorne was sitting, rubbing his wrists. Vance was standing nearby, looking like a child who had just broken a priceless vase. Chief Harrison, a tall man in his late 50s, rushed over to Thorne. Elias, are you all right?" Thorne stood up slowly, wincing as he moved his shoulder. "I'll survive, Marcus. I've had worse days in Kandahar." Harrison turned to Vance. The look on the chief's face was enough to wither a plant. "Officer Vance, step forward." Vance stepped forward, his knees shaking. "Chief, He refused to identify." "He was tampering." "Silence," Harrison yelled. "I don't want to hear a single word from your mouth unless it is I resign. You arrested a decorated war hero for putting quarters in a parking meter." "He fit the description," Vance stammered. "What description?" Harrison demanded, stepping into Vance's face. "The description of a black man existing in public. I saw the video, Vance. It's already online. 2 million views in 20 minutes. I saw you shove him. I saw you twist his arm. I heard him tell you he was complying." The mayor stepped forward, his face grim. "Officer, you have humiliated this city. You have assaulted a man who has done more for this country in one day than you have in your entire life." Vance looked around for support. He looked at the other officers. Everyone was looking away. No one was going to jump on this grenade for him. The blue wall of silence had crumbled under the weight of sheer incompetence and stupidity. I followed protocol," Vance whispered weakly. "You violated the Fourth Amendment, the department's de-escalation policy, and basic human decency," Harrison said. He reached out his hand. "Badge. Gun. Now." Vance's hands trembled as he unholstered his weapon and unpinned his badge. He placed them in the chief's hand. "You are relieved of duty pending an internal investigation," Harrison said. "Get out of my station." Vance turned and walked toward the door. He wasn't the strutting rooster anymore. He was a small, broken man. As he pushed through the doors, he saw the crowd of reporters already gathering outside. Harrison turned back to Thorne. "Elias, I am so sorry. We will drop all charges immediately. We'll get you to a doctor for that shoulder." Thorne adjusted his cuffs. He looked at the chief. "The charges aren't the problem, Marcus. The problem is that if I wasn't who I am, if I was just a 19-year-old kid from the South Side, I'd still be in that cell, and no one would be coming to get me." The room went quiet. Thorne's words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. "We have work to do," Thorne said. "But first I want my keys back, and I believe my meter has expired." The aftermath was swift and brutal. The video of the arrest didn't just go viral, it became a global headline. "Retired Ranger arrested for parking while black." The image of Elias Thorne, dignified and calm, being shoved by the snarling Officer Vance, became a symbol of the broken trust between police and the community. Officer Kyle Vance was fired 3 days later. The internal investigation was the fastest in the department's history. His black file of previous complaints was leaked to the press, exposing a system that had protected a bad apple for far too long. He was charged with assault and violation of oath of office. He lost his pension, his career, and his reputation. Preston Gantry, the antique shop owner, faced his own reckoning. The 911 call was released. His lies about Thorne casing cars and being aggressive were exposed as pure fabrication born of racism. The internet descended on Gantry's antiquities. Within a week, the shop had 50,000 one-star reviews. Protesters stood outside his glass window day and night. 2 months later, Gantry filed for bankruptcy and closed the shop. He learned that the community he thought he was protecting wanted nothing to do with him. The city of Atlanta settled with Elias Thorne for $6 million to avoid a federal civil rights lawsuit that they knew they would lose. Thorne didn't keep a dime of it. He donated the entire sum to the Veterans Housing Project he had been trying to fund, the very project he was meeting the mayor about that day. The building was named Liberty Hall. 6 months later, on Veterans Day, Elias Thorne stood at a podium in front of City Hall. His arm was in a sling. The surgery to repair his rotator cuff had been successful, but the recovery was slow. The crowd was massive. Police officers, veterans, citizens of all colors. He looked out at the sea of faces. He didn't speak with anger. He spoke with the quiet authority of a man who has seen the worst of humanity and still believes in the best of it. "Liberty," Thorne said, his voice echoing off the buildings, "is not a gift. It is a practice. It is something we must do every single day. When we allow fear to dictate our actions, when we allow bias to blind our eyes, we are not free. We are prisoners of our own prejudice." He paused, looking at the spot on the corner where he had been arrested. "I fought for this country," Thorne continued. "I fought for the right of every man and woman to stand on a corner without fear. That badge," he pointed to the police officers in the front row, "is a shield, not a sword. Use it to protect. Never use it to conquer." The applause was thunderous. It wasn't just a speech, it was a command. The sun set over Atlanta. Elias Thorne walked to his car, the same silver Mercedes. He put a quarter in the meter just out of habit. He smiled a small, sad smile. He was free. But he knew the war wasn't over. It was just a different kind of battlefield now. We often think that titles, medals, and expensive suits are armor against injustice. But this story reminds us that prejudice sees only what it wants to see. Elias Thorne's dignity shattered a corrupt officer's career, but how many others have been broken in silence? It makes you wonder if a decorated war hero isn't safe from profiling who is. Do you think Officer Vance should have faced prison time instead of just losing his job? And what about the shop owner who made the false call? Should there be legal penalties for weaponizing the police? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in justice and want to see more stories where the truth wins, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us shine a light in the dark corners.
Stand up! Now! You're loitering and you're failing to comply.
I'm not loitering, I'm injured. This is a war memorial.
I don't care who you think you are. Get up before this gets worse.
You put hands on me again, officer, and you'll regret how wrong you are.
The command cut through the humid afternoon air like a whip crack. Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't jump. He simply continued to massage the tender skin around his knee, his eyes fixed on the granite steps beneath him. He took a slow breath, counting to 3 before looking up. Standing over him, blocking the sun, was a police officer who looked like he'd been waiting all day for a fight. "I'm not sleeping, officer," Marcus said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that carried the weight of decades of command. "I'm resting my leg. I'll be moving on in a moment." "I said get up." The officer snapped his hand, resting casually, almost eagerly on his baton. "This is a public memorial, not a homeless shelter. You're loitering, you're scaring the public, and you need to move along. Now." "I'm aware of what this is," Marcus replied, his tone remaining terrifyingly calm. "I'm a taxpayer. I'm a citizen, and I'm sitting on public property." "You're trespassing," the officer countered, stepping closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "And now you're failing to comply with a lawful order. You want to spend the afternoon in a cell, or you want to walk away?" Officer Derek Vance was 29 years old, a 4-year veteran of the force who carried himself with the swagger of a man who believed the badge granted him divinity. He was fit, aggressive, and had a haircut that was just a little too tight on the sides. In his 4 years, Vance had racked up 9 complaints. Most were for discourtesy. 2 were for excessive force. He had a reputation in the precinct, the kind of reputation that made older, wiser cops shake their heads when his name came up at roll call. He was known as a hot shot, a guy who escalated situations just to feel the rush of controlling them. He didn't see people, he saw targets. He didn't see citizens, he saw subjects. And on this particular Tuesday, he looked at Marcus Thorne, a black man in a gray hooded sweatshirt and sweatpants, sitting on the steps of the city's War Memorial Plaza, and saw nothing but a nuisance, a vagrant, a problem to be swept away so the good citizens wouldn't have to look at him. What Vance didn't see, because his bias had already painted the picture for him, was the quality of the watch on Marcus's wrist, a vintage timepiece worth more than Vance's car. He didn't notice the expensive running shoes sitting neatly beside Marcus on the step. He certainly didn't notice the rigid, unnatural angle of Marcus's right lower leg hidden beneath the sweatpants. "I'm not going to ask you again," Vance said, his voice rising, playing to the invisible audience he always felt he was performing for. "Stand up. ID now." "You're making a mistake, son," Marcus said softly. "Don't call me son. I am an officer of the law. Stand up." Before we see exactly how Officer Vance's arrogance cost the city millions, I need to ask, where are you watching from today? If you believe that respect is something that should be earned, not demanded, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We bring you these stories to shine a light on the truth, and your support keeps us going. To understand the magnitude of the insult taking place on those granite steps, you have to understand the man sitting on them. Marcus Thorne was 58 years old, though he moved with the power of a man 20 years younger. He wasn't homeless. He wasn't a drifter. He was a retired Master Sergeant of the United States Marine Corps, a man who had given 25 years of his life to the service of his country. Marcus had enlisted at 18, seeking a way out of a neighborhood that promised nothing but dead ends. He found a home in the Corps. He found disciplined purpose and a brotherhood that transcended race and background. He had served in the Gulf War in Somalia and multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was a recon Marine, the tip of the spear, a man trained to survive in conditions that would break an ordinary person in hours. The injury that defined his current life happened 14 years ago in the Helmand province. An improvised explosive device. A coward's weapon buried in the dirt had detonated under his convoy. Marcus had pulled 3 men from a burning Humvee before he realized his own right leg was shattered below the knee. He didn't stop until his men were safe. That action earned him the Silver Star and a Purple Heart. It also earned him a prosthetic leg and a medical retirement he hadn't wanted. But Marcus Thorne wasn't the kind of man to sit on a porch and rust. After retiring, he utilized his top-secret clearance and decades of logistical experience to found a private security consulting firm. He worked with the Department of Defense, auditing security protocols for naval bases. He was successful, wealthy, and respected in circles that Officer Vance couldn't even get security clearance to enter. That Tuesday morning, Marcus had gone for a run. It was part of his routine, keeping the machine running, keeping the discipline alive. He had run 5 miles along the riverfront, a grueling pace for a man with a prosthetic, but he pushed himself because that was the only way he knew how to live. By the time he reached the War Memorial Plaza, the friction on his stump was becoming unbearable. The liner of his prosthetic had shifted, causing a hot, searing pain with every step. He needed 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to sit down, detach the lower limb, adjust the liner, and let the inflammation subside. He chose the steps of the memorial specifically because it was a place of reverence. It was a place where he, of all people, had the right to be. He sat on the warm stone surrounded by names of the fallen etched into black granite. He wasn't bothering a soul. He was a warrior taking a knee, paying silent respects while he tended to his wounds. He was in the middle of a private moment of pain and reflection when the shadow of Derek Vance fell over him. The chain of events that led Officer Vance to the plaza didn't start with police intuition. It started with a phone call from a man named Greg Miller. Greg Miller was 38 years old, a commercial real estate developer who had recently purchased the high-rise building directly across the street from the War Memorial. Greg was the definition of new money. He drove a car that cost more than a house, wore suits that were tailored in Italy, and viewed the city not as a community, but as a portfolio. Greg was currently trying to lease the ground floor retail space of his building to a high-end coffee franchise. He was obsessed with curb appeal. He wanted the area to look pristine, sanitized, and inviting to the upper-crust clientele he hoped to attract. In Greg's world, public spaces weren't for the public. They were the front lawn of his investment. From his third-floor office window, Greg had spotted Marcus sitting on the steps. He didn't see a veteran. He didn't see a man in expensive athletic gear. He saw a black man in a hoodie sitting idle in the middle of a workday. In Greg's biased calculation, that equaled homeless. It equaled property value risk. Greg watched Marcus for exactly 2 minutes before his impatience boiled over. He didn't go down to ask if the man was okay. He didn't consider that the man might be resting. He picked up his phone and dialed 911, knowing exactly what keywords to use to get a quick response. 911. What is your emergency? Yes, this is Greg Miller calling from the Miller Building on 4th. There's a vagrant on the War Memorial steps. He's been there for an hour. A lie. It had been 4 minutes. He's harassing people walking by. He looks unstable, possibly intoxicated. He's yelling at women passing by. Another lie. Marcus hadn't spoken a word to anyone, but Greg knew that loitering might get a slow response. Harassing women and unstable would bring the cavalry. "Is he armed?" the dispatcher asked. "I don't know," Greg said, dropping his voice to sound concerned. "He's got a big bag with him. He keeps reaching into it. Honestly, it's making my tenants very nervous. We can't have this kind of element threatening people in broad daylight." "We'll send a unit right away, sir." The call went out over the radio. "Dispatch to Unit 4 Alpha. Suspicious person at the War Memorial. Male black-gray hoodie. Caller states subject is harassing pedestrians, possibly intoxicated, acting erratic. Caller is a local business owner." Officer Vance picked up the mic. "4 Alpha, show me en route." Vance smiled as he turned the wheel of his cruiser. He loved these calls. They were easy. Clean up the streets, assert some dominance, maybe get a quick arrest if the guy got mouthy. He didn't verify the information. He didn't plan to observe the subject first. He had the narrative in his head: erratic, drunk, aggressive vagrant. When Vance pulled up to the curb, he didn't see a calm man adjusting his leg. He saw the enemy Greg Miller had fabricated. And because Vance was the kind of officer who believed every civilian complaint that aligned with his worldview, he walked up those steps ready for war. The sun was beating down on the limestone steps, the heat radiating off the stone. It was a beautiful, clear day, the kind of day that usually made people cheerful. But Officer Derek Vance wasn't cheerful. He was agitated. He stomped up the steps, his boots heavy and loud. As he approached Marcus, his internal monologue was running a mile a minute. Look at him, middle of the day wearing sweats, probably high on something. Thinks he owns the place. Not on my watch. I'm not going to ask you again. Vance repeated, his voice echoing off the memorial walls. Stand up. ID now. Marcus looked at the officer. Really looked at him. He saw the dilated pupils of an adrenaline junkie. He saw the hand twitching near the holster. He recognized the signs of a man who had lost control of his own temper. Officer, Marcus said, keeping his hands visible on his knees. I'm not refusing to identify myself, but my wallet is in my gym bag, which is right there. If I reach for it, I don't want you getting nervous. I don't get nervous, Vance sneered. I get reactive. You keep your hands where I can see them. Why are you even here? This is a memorial for soldiers, not a hangout spot for bums. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. That one stung. I know who this memorial is for. I have friends on this wall. Vance laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. Yeah, I bet. You and every other guy with a cardboard sign has a buddy on the wall. Listen, pal, I don't have time for your fairy tales. You're making people uncomfortable. We got calls that you're harassing women. That is a lie, Marcus said firmly. I haven't spoken to a soul. I've been here 10 minutes fixing a medical issue with my leg. You're drunk, Vance stated, not asking but declaring. I can see it in your eyes, glossy, slurring your words. Marcus spoke with the precise, clipped diction of a senior NCO. He was about as drunk as a judge. I am sober, I am injured, and you are harassing a private citizen on public property. Okay, that's it. Vance stepped back and unclipped his radio, but he didn't call for backup. He just wanted to look busy. You're detained, loitering, public intoxication, and failure to obey a lawful order. Detained. Marcus shifted his weight, wincing as the raw skin on his stump rubbed against the carbon fiber socket. On what reasonable suspicion, being black on a sunny day? Watch your mouth. Vance pointed a finger in Marcus's face. You don't play the race card with me. This is about you breaking the law. Now stand up before I drag you up. I can't just stand up quickly. Marcus explained, his patience wearing thin. My prosthetic is loose. I need to tighten the strap or I'm going to fall. If you give me 30 seconds... I'm done listening to your excuses, Vance yelled. He reached out and grabbed the fabric of Marcus's hoodie. Get up, Vance yanked. Marcus, a man who weighed 220 pounds of solid muscle, didn't budge easily, but the sudden motion threw him off balance. He instinctively put a hand back to brace himself. "Resisting," Vance shouted. "Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Marcus roared, his voice finally rising to match the officer's volume. "I am trying to keep my balance." The physical contact changed the energy in the plaza instantly. Passers-by stopped. Phones came out. A woman near the fountain turned her stroller around to watch. A businessman in a suit paused, holding his briefcase with both hands. Marcus stabilized himself and looked Vance dead in the eye. "You put your hands on me again, officer, and we are going to have a very different conversation. I am a retired Master Sergeant of the United States Marine Corps. I have a prosthetic leg because I left the real one in Helmand Province. Now back off." Vance froze for a split second. The words were specific. The tone was commanding. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. But then his ego took the wheel again. He looked at the sweatpants. He looked at the hoodie. He looked at the skin color. And he decided it was impossible. "Stolen valor." Vance spat the words out like poison. "That's a felony in some places, you know. Lying about service, you make me sick. You guys are all the same. You learn a few words like Helmand and Master Sergeant and think it's a get-out-of-jail-free card." Marcus felt a cold rage settle in his chest. It wasn't the heat of anger. It was the icy calm of combat. "You think I'm lying. I know you're lying." Vance smirked. "I've seen real Marines. They don't look like you. They don't lounge around on steps scaring people. You're a grifter. A homeless grifter trying to steal honor you didn't earn." "Check my bag," Marcus said, nodding toward the duffel bag. "My ID is in the side pocket, the blue wallet. Open it." "I'm not touching your dirty bag," Vance said. "Probably got needles in it." "Then let me get it." "No." Vance's hand went to his taser. "You don't reach for anything. You're done. You're going in. I'm taking you in for stolen valor, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct." "You are making a career-ending mistake," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low warning. "If you arrest me, you better be right. Because if you're wrong, if you are arresting a disabled veteran for sitting on a memorial dedicated to his brothers, there is no hole deep enough for you to hide in." Vance laughed. He actually laughed. "Is that a threat? Add threatening an officer to the list. Turn around, hands behind your back. I can't balance well if you... Turn around." Vance lunged. He didn't wait for compliance. He grabbed Marcus's left arm and twisted it behind his back with force that was entirely unnecessary. Marcus grunted pain shooting through his shoulder, an old rotator cuff injury from 2004 flaring up. "I am not resisting," Marcus announced loudly, looking directly at a teenager filming with an iPhone. "I am complying. This officer is using excessive force on a disabled veteran." "Shut up." Vance cranked the arm higher. "Get on the ground, stomach now." "I cannot get on my stomach," Marcus yelled. "My leg doesn't bend that way." "Stop fighting me." Vance kicked Marcus's right leg, the prosthetic one. The hollow thud of the boot hitting carbon fiber should have been a clue. It should have been the moment Vance realized he was wrong. But the sound didn't register. Vance just thought the guy was wearing padding. He swept Marcus's legs. Marcus went down hard, his face hitting the granite step. His glasses skittered across the stone. The crowd was audibly gasping now. "Hey! He said he's disabled!" a woman shouted from the sidewalk. "Back up!" Vance screamed at the crowd, pulling his taser with his free hand and pointing it at the witnesses. "Back the hell up or you're all going to jail for obstruction." He holstered the taser and dropped his knee into the center of Marcus's back. He grabbed Marcus's other wrist and forced them together. The click of the handcuffs was loud and final. Marcus lay on the cold stone, his cheek pressed against the grit. He stopped speaking. He stopped moving. He went into survival mode. He cataloged everything. The time, 2:15 p.m. The officer's nameplate. D. Vance. The badge number, 4922. The pain in his stump was agonizing, a sharp, biting throb, where the impact had twisted the socket. "You got anything on you?" Vance panted, patting down Marcus's pockets roughly. He found a phone, a set of keys, expensive car keys. He pulled them out and looked at the Mercedes logo, frowned, and shoved them into his own pocket. "Probably stole the car, too." "My bag?" Marcus said from the ground. "Do not leave my bag." "I'm taking your trash," Vance grunted. He hauled Marcus up. Because Marcus couldn't use his leg properly, he stumbled. Vance interpreted this as more resistance and shoved him toward the patrol car. Marcus hopped on his good leg, dragged by the handcuffs, humiliated in front of 50 people. He was a man who had led platoons into battle. He was a man who advised generals. And now he was being manhandled by a 29-year-old with a badge and a god complex. Vance threw him into the back of the cruiser. The space was cramped. Marcus had to twist his body to accommodate his prosthetic, which was now completely misaligned. Vance slammed the door and walked back to grab the gym bag. He threw it into the trunk. He didn't look inside. He didn't want to know. He got into the driver's seat, sweating, pumped full of adrenaline. "You're in big trouble, pal," Vance said, catching Marcus's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Stolen valor. I hate guys like you." Marcus stared back, his expression unreadable. "You should have checked the bag, Officer Vance." "Shut up." The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. Marcus spent every second of it memorizing the route, the speed, the officer's demeanor. He wasn't a prisoner. He was an intelligence officer gathering data, and he knew exactly how to use it. When they pulled into the sally port of the precinct, Vance was still riding his high. He hauled Marcus out of the car. "Walk," Vance ordered. "I'm limping," Marcus corrected. "Because you damaged my prosthetic." "Tell it to the judge." They walked into the station processing area. It was busy. Officers were booking suspects, typing reports, drinking coffee. The desk sergeant on duty was Thomas Miller, no relation to the caller, a 60-year-old grizzly bear of a man who had been a cop since the late 80s. He was 2 weeks away from retirement. He had seen everything. Vance marched Marcus up to the desk. "Got a live one, Sarge. Loitering, public intoxication, resisting, and stolen valor. Guy was sleeping on the war memorial steps. Claimed he was a Marine Master Sergeant." Vance chuckled. "Doesn't have a shred of ID on him." Sergeant Miller looked up from his paperwork. He looked at Vance. Then he looked at Marcus. Miller's eyes went wide. He stood up slowly. "Marcus," Miller said, his voice confused. "Marcus Thorne." Officer Vance froze. He looked at the sergeant, then back at Marcus. You know this guy, Sarge. He's a frequent flyer." Sergeant Miller ignored Vance completely. He came around the desk, moving faster than he had in years. "Get those cuffs off him, now." "Sarge, he's a vagrant. He was resisting." "I said get them off!" Miller roared, his voice shaking the glass partitions of the booking room. The entire room went silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing. Vance fumbled for his keys, his hands suddenly shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists, his face stoic. "I apologize, Marcus." Sergeant Miller said, his face pale. "Are you okay?" "My prosthetic is damaged, Tom," Marcus said calmly. "And I believe I have a bruised rib, but otherwise I'm fine." "Prosthetic," Vance whispered. He looked down at Marcus's sweatpants. "Where is his property?" Miller barked at Vance. In the trunk. His bag." "Go get it. Run." Vance ran. He came back 30 seconds later with the gym bag. He put it on the counter. "Open it," Marcus said to Vance. "Side pocket. Blue wallet." Vance unzipped the bag. His fingers found the wallet. He opened it. The first thing he saw was a standard driver's license. Marcus Thorne. address in the wealthiest district of the city. The second thing he saw was a blue ID card, Department of Defense, retired military, rank Master Sergeant E8. The third thing he saw was a white access badge. Level 5 security clearance, Pentagon access, contractor. Vance felt the blood drain from his face. He felt like he was falling. "Read it out loud," Miller commanded. "Master Sergeant, Marcus Thorne." Vance stammered. "Keep reading," Miller said. The card behind it. Vance pulled out a folded piece of paper that was tucked behind the ID. It was a laminated card. "Silver Star recipient, Purple Heart recipient." Vance dropped the wallet on the counter. It hit the surface with a slap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You arrested a Silver Star recipient," Miller said, his voice low and dangerous. "For sitting on a war memorial. You accused him of stolen valor." He didn't show me. I thought—" Vance was hyperventilating. "I tried to show you," Marcus said, his voice cutting through Vance's panic. "I told you exactly who I was. I told you I was injured. I told you I was resting. You didn't hear me because you didn't want to hear me. You saw a black man in a hoodie and you decided I was trash." The precinct captain, a stern woman named Captain Reynolds, had emerged from her office at the sound of the shouting. She walked over, picked up the ID cards, and looked at Vance. "Badge and gun," she said simply. "Captain, I was following a call. Badge and gun on the desk. You are on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending an internal investigation. You don't touch a suspect. You don't drive a car. You don't even look at a uniform until I say so." Vance unholstered his weapon with trembling hands. He unpinned his badge. He placed them next to the wallet of the man he had tormented. "Mr. Thorne," Captain Reynolds said, turning to Marcus, "I cannot express how sorry I am. We will drive you to the hospital immediately to have your leg checked. We will have your car retrieved. And I personally guarantee you that this will be handled with the utmost severity." Marcus looked at Vance, who was now just a 29-year-old man in a t-shirt stripped of his power. "I don't want your apology, Captain," Marcus said. "I want his job, and I want the man who called 911. The video hit the internet 3 hours later. The teenager who filmed it captioned it, "Cop beats up disabled vet for sitting down." By evening, it had 3 million views. By the next morning, it was on every national news network. The image of Officer Vance kneeing a man in the back while he screamed about his prosthetic leg was played on loop. The audio of Marcus calmly identifying himself as a Marine, followed by Vance mocking him with stolen valor, sparked a nationwide outrage that crossed all political lines. Veterans groups descended on the city. Protesters filled the plaza where the arrest happened. The hashtag Stand With Marcus trended for a week. The investigation was swift because the evidence was overwhelming. The body camera footage from Vance confirmed everything Marcus said. It showed the bias, the aggression, the refusal to look at ID, and the excessive force. Greg Miller, the real estate developer, tried to hide. But the 911 call was released. His voice claiming Marcus was harassing women and drunk was played side by side with the video showing Marcus sitting silently. It was proof of a false report. The internet detectives found Greg's business within hours. His tenants, horrified by the association, broke their leases. The high-end coffee shop he was wooing pulled out of the deal. Greg Miller's curb appeal obsession ended up costing him his reputation and nearly his business. He was charged with filing a false police report, a misdemeanor, but the social penalty was a life sentence. Officer Derek Vance was fired 4 weeks later. The review board found he had violated 14 separate department policies. He was stripped of his law enforcement certification, meaning he could never be a cop again in that state. He was also charged criminally with assault and battery under color of authority. He avoided jail time by taking a plea deal that included 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service he had to perform at a veterans hospital. The city knew they couldn't win a lawsuit. They settled with Marcus Thorne for $6.5 million. It was one of the largest settlements for a wrongful arrest in the city's history. Marcus didn't keep the money. He used $6.5 million to start a legal defense fund for veterans who had been mistreated by police. He named it the Honor and Dignity Fund. 6 months later, Marcus returned to the War Memorial Plaza. He was wearing a suit. He walked with a slight limp. The damage to his prosthetic socket had required a new fitting, and it still wasn't quite right. He stood at the top of the steps, looking down at the spot where he had been handcuffed. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just tired. He realized that for men like Vance and Miller, his service didn't matter. His sacrifice didn't matter. The only thing they respected was power, and he had been forced to use his to remind them of his humanity. It's a hard truth to swallow, isn't it? That a man can give his leg for his country, can carry the scars of war for a lifetime, and still be treated like a criminal in his own hometown just because he wanted to sit down for 5 minutes. It makes you wonder if a Silver Star recipient isn't safe from this kind of bias who is... We talk a lot about supporting our troops in this country. We put stickers on our cars and fly flags on our porches. But true support isn't a slogan. True support is respecting the dignity of the men and women who served even when they aren't wearing a uniform, even when they're just a black man in a hoodie sitting on a step. Officer Vance thought he was protecting the city. In reality, he was attacking the very values that Marcus Thorne had bled to defend. What do you think? Should there be a mandatory national registry for officers fired for misconduct so they can't just move to the next town? And should making a false 911 call based on race be a federal hate crime? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story moved you, please share it. The more we talk about this, the harder it becomes for it to happen again. Until next time, take care of each other.
Put the cart down and step away from the truck, now.
I paid for this lumber. Receipts in my back pocket.
Don't reach for anything. Hands where I can see
I'm
them.
making a mistake. I'm a federal liaison.
I don't care who you say you are. Turn around. You're going in cuffs.
Easy. These cuffs better come off quick.
Put that cart down and step away from the truck. I'm not asking you again, but I'm loading my supplies. Manager says you're stealing property. I bought this lumber 20 minutes ago. I've got the receipt right here in my pocket. Don't reach for anything. Hands where I can see them. You're making a mistake, son. I'm a federal liaison. I don't care if you're the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You're going into cuffs. Officer Kyle Vance had been patrolling the streets of Richmond for 6 years when he made the decision that would end his career, bankrupt a national retail chain, and cost the city $6.5 million. He was 28 years old, aggressive, and entirely convinced that his instinct for spotting criminals was flawless. On a bright Tuesday morning in the parking lot of Builders Depot, he received a call from a panicked store manager about a theft in progress involving a large man and a shopping cart. The large man was Colonel Marcus Thorne, USMC, retired, a 62-year-old combat veteran and current federal veteran liaison who was simply loading plywood for a disabled veterans housing project. What Vance did next, ignoring Thorne's identification, dismissing physical receipts, and manhandling a decorated war hero in front of a crowd of shoppers, would become a definitive case study in how implicit bias rots the badge from the inside out. Before we get into the details, tell me, where are you joining us from today? If you believe that respect should be earned and not demanded by a badge, hit that subscribe button. We are here to shine a light on the truth, and we need your help to do it. Builders Depot sits off the busy interstate bypass, a sprawling concrete box filled with contractors, suburban dads, and the smell of sawdust. It was 11:30 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. The autumn sun was high and bright, casting sharp shadows across the asphalt. The parking lot was bustling with pickup trucks and vans. Marcus Thorne had backed his Ford F-150 into a spot near the loading zone. He wasn't a man who rushed. At 62, Thorne moved with the deliberate, efficient grace of a man who had spent 30 years in the Marine Corps. He stood 6'3", broad-shouldered, wearing a faded gray t-shirt, work boots, and a ball cap that said Semper Fi. He was currently serving as a federal liaison for the Department of Veterans Affairs, a high-ranking civilian position that tasked him with auditing and facilitating housing programs for wounded warriors. He reported directly to Washington. But today, he was just a man buying 40 sheets of plywood and 20 boxes of framing nails for a renovation project in the city's south side. He had paid $1,200 in cash at the pro desk, shaken hands with the cashier, and wheeled the heavy flatbed cart out to his truck. He was halfway through sliding the third sheet of plywood into the truck bed when he heard the voice. It wasn't a polite "excuse me," it was a bark. "Hey, you stop right there." Thorne paused, holding the weight of the wood with one hand, and turned. Striding toward him was Brett Miller, the store's 29-year-old manager. Miller was wearing a stiff button-down shirt that looked uncomfortable in the heat, and his face was flushed with a mix of adrenaline and indignation. Miller had transferred to this location 3 months ago and had been on a crusade to reduce shrinkage, or theft, which he was convinced was rampant. He saw Thorne, a tall black man in work clothes, moving a large quantity of expensive lumber, and his mind immediately flagged it as suspicious. In Miller's limited worldview, customers who spent that kind of money usually wore polo shirts or company uniforms. They didn't look like Marcus Thorne. "Can I help you?" Thorne asked, his voice a deep baritone that carried easily over the traffic noise. He didn't drop the wood, he just held it waiting. Miller stopped 5 feet away, pointing a finger. "I need to see a receipt for that, right now. We've had guys loading up carts and walking out the front door all month. You're not taking that anywhere." Thorne frowned, his patience already tested by the heavy lifting. "I paid at the pro desk not 10 minutes ago. The receipt is in my back pocket. Let me just load this sheet." "No," Miller shouted, stepping closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "Drop the wood. Hands out of your pockets. You're trying to scam us. I saw you bypass the checkout line." Thorne slowly lowered the plywood into the truck bed, dusting his hands off on his jeans. He turned fully to face the younger man towering over him, not with aggression, but with presence. "Son, I didn't bypass anything. I went to the pro desk. If you want to see the receipt, I will show you the receipt, but you need to lower your voice." Miller didn't like being called son, and he certainly didn't like being told what to do by someone he had already decided was a thief. "I'm calling the police," Miller announced, pulling his phone out with a trembling hand. "You're trespassing and you're stealing inventory. Stay right there." Thorne sighed a sound of profound exhaustion. He leaned against the side of his truck, crossed his massive arms, and gestured to the phone. "Go ahead. Call them. I'll wait." Miller dialed 911, his eyes never leaving Thorne, as if he expected the 62-year-old to bolt across the parking lot. "Yes, I have a shoplifter at the Builders Depot on Broad Street, aggressive male. He's trying to steal $1,000 worth of lumber. He's refusing to leave. I feel threatened. Send someone now." Officer Kyle Vance was 3 miles away when the call came over the radio. "Code 3 response, Builders Depot. Larceny in progress. Suspect is a black male, 60s, large build, reportedly aggressive with staff." Vance hit the lights and sirens, his heart rate jumping. Vance had been with the force for 6 years, and like Officer Bartlett in Seattle, he had a file that was thicker than it should have been. 6 civilian complaints in the last 2 years. Discourtesy, unlawful stop, excessive force. None of them had stuck. The department called him proactive. His sergeant called him a hard charger. The community called him a bully. Vance had a specific view of the world. There were wolves and there were sheepdogs. He considered himself a sheepdog, but he had a terrible habit of seeing wolves where there were only neighbors. As Vance wove through traffic, his mind constructed the scenario before he even saw it. In his head, he wasn't driving toward a misunderstanding. He was driving toward a confrontation. Aggressive male, refusing to leave. These words triggered a tactical response in Vance that overrode his training in de-escalation. He griped the steering wheel, adrenaline flooding his system. He wasn't thinking about conflict resolution. He was thinking about control. Establish dominance, neutralize the threat, secure the scene. That was the mantra. He didn't consider that the suspect might be a customer. He didn't consider that the manager might be wrong. He certainly didn't consider that he was about to go toe-to-toe with a man who had led battalions into combat zones while Vance was still learning to tie his shoes. When Vance's cruiser screeched into the parking lot, he saw the scene exactly as Miller had described it, but interpreted through his own biased lens. He saw a large black man standing by a truck filled with merchandise. He saw a white manager standing back, looking fearful. That was all the confirmation Vance needed. He parked his cruiser diagonally behind Thorne's F-150, effectively boxing him in. He stepped out of the vehicle, not with a notepad, but with his hand resting on the grip of his holstered service weapon. The crowd in the parking lot had grown. Shoppers pushing carts slowed down to watch. A few people had already pulled out their phones. Thorne watched the officer approach. He had seen this walk before. He had seen it in young Marines who were too eager for a fight, and he had seen it in military police who had forgotten that their job was to serve. He stood up straight, uncrossing his arms, keeping his hands visible and open at his sides. He knew the drill. He knew that any sudden movement, any reach for a wallet could be interpreted as a threat by a jittery cop. "Officer," Thorne said calmly as Vance marched up. "I'm glad you're here. Maybe we can clear this up. The manager seems to think—" "Quiet," Vance barked, stopping 6 feet away. "I didn't ask you to speak, you two. Step away from the vehicle. Now." Thorne held his ground, his voice steady. "I am complying, officer. I am stepping away, but I need to tell you that I have proof of purchase right here." "I told you to be quiet," Vance shouted, his voice cracking slightly. He was escalating, feeding off the tension he was creating. "You are being detained for investigation of grand larceny. Turn around and face the truck." Thorne looked at the officer, really looked at him. He saw the sweat on Vance's brow, the tight set of his jaw, the eyes that were darting around but refusing to make genuine human contact. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on the command tone he had used to brief generals. "You are making a mistake. I am a federal official. I have identification in my pocket that you need to see. I have a receipt for these goods." Vance stepped forward, grabbing Thorne's left arm. "I said turn around. Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Thorne stated clearly, looking directly at the camera phone that a woman in a minivan was pointing at them. "I am standing still. I am telling you that I have a receipt. I am telling you that I am a federal veteran liaison. Check my credentials." Vance sneered. "Federal liaison. Yeah, right. And I'm the King of England. Anyone can buy a fake badge on the internet. Turn around or you're getting tased." The threat hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Thorne knew he could physically overpower the young officer with little effort. He knew hand-to-hand combat techniques that Vance had only seen in movies. But he also knew that if he so much as flinched, he would be shot. And if he was shot, the narrative would be, "Suspect attacked officer." So he chose the weapon of the disciplined, absolute, terrifying calm. "I am turning around," Thorne said, moving slowly. "I am placing my hands on the truck. You are now arresting a federal employee without cause. You are refusing to verify exculpatory evidence. You are violating my civil rights." Vance didn't care. He kicked Thorne's legs apart, roughly patting him down. He felt the wallet in the back pocket, pulled it out, and threw it on the hood of the truck. He felt the receipt paper, crumpled it, and tossed it to the ground. "That's trash," Vance muttered. "You're under arrest for grand larceny and resisting arrest." He grabbed Thorne's wrists and twisted them behind his back, snapping the handcuffs on tight. Too tight. "Hey!" a voice shouted from the crowd. It was an older man in a plaid shirt. "He showed you the receipt. We heard him. You threw it on the ground. Vance spun his head around. Back up, or you're next for obstruction. The manager Miller was smiling now, a smug look of victory on his face. I told you, Miller said to the crowd. He was stealing. We have zero tolerance here. Thornface, pressed against the hot metal of his own truck, closed his eyes for a second. He thought of the oath he had taken to support and defend the Constitution. He thought of the Silver Star sitting in a frame in his study awarded for pulling 3 men out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah. And now he was being handcuffed by a child with a badge who thought a black man with lumber had to be a thief. Officer, Thorne said, his voice muffled against the truck. My credentials are in that wallet you just threw. The badge is silver and gold. It says Department of Veterans Affairs Office of the Secretary. Open it. Vance finished tightening the cuffs and grabbed the wallet. He flipped it open, glanced at the heavy metal badge and the laminated ID card with the holographic seal. He paused for a fraction of a second. A smarter man would have stopped. A smarter man would have seen the words Federal Liaison and Law Enforcement Authority and realized he had stepped into a bear trap. But Vance wasn't smart. He was committed. He snapped the wallet shut and shoved it into his own pocket. Nice toy, Vance said loud enough for the crowd to hear. Ordered that online, huh? Impersonating a federal officer. That's another charge. Let's go. Vance hauled Thorne away from the truck, marching him toward the patrol car. Thorne didn't struggle. He walked with his head up his eyes, scanning the crowd, memorizing faces, looking for witnesses. My name is Colonel Marcus Thorne, he announced, his voice projecting like he was on the parade deck. I am being arrested unlawfully. Please record this. Please keep recording. Vance shoved him into the back of the cruiser. The space was cramped, the hard plastic seat unforgiving. As the door slammed shut, separating him from the outside world, Thorne felt a cold, sharp anger settle in his gut. It wasn't the hot rage of youth. It was the cold, strategic fury of a man who knows exactly how to dismantle an enemy. He watched through the wire mesh as Vance strutted back to the manager, the two of them shaking hands, sharing a laugh. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken out the trash. They had no idea they had just initiated a sequence of events that would burn their professional lives to the ground. The drive to the precinct was a 12-minute journey through the suburbs. Vance drove with one hand on the wheel, typing on his dash computer with the other. He glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting Thorne's eyes. You know, Vance said, his tone conversational, now dripping with condescension, if you people just listened, things wouldn't get this far. You want respect, you gotta give respect. You don't argue with the police. Thorne sat silently. He was mentally drafting the memo he would send to the Department of Justice. He was cataloging the timestamps. 11:42 a.m. unlawful arrest. 11:45 a.m. seizure of personal property without inventory. 11:50 a.m. failure to read Miranda rights. I'm talking to you, Vance said, annoyed by the silence. You mute now, Cat, got your tongue. Or are you thinking about how you're going to explain that fake badge to the judge? Officer Vance, Thorne said, speaking for the first time since being put in the car. He had read the nameplate on the dashboard. I am not speaking to you because anything I say can be used against me. But I will tell you this, I served this country for 30 years. I have grandchildren older than you, and the badge in your pocket is not a toy. When we get to the station, do not put it in evidence. Give it directly to the watch commander, for your own sake. Vance laughed, a short, sharp bark. Yeah, okay, Grandpa. I'll be sure to do that. Maybe they'll give you a senior discount on your bail. Vance turned up the radio, drowning out the silence, oblivious to the fact that he was driving a hearse for his own career. They arrived at the 4th precinct. Vance pulled into the sally port, the garage door rumbling shut behind them. He hauled Thorne out of the car, gripping his arm tightly, parading him past the dispatch window and into the booking area. The station smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Reynolds. Reynolds was 58, a Vietnam vet who had been a cop since the 80s. He had tired eyes, and he had seen everything. He looked up as Vance dragged Thorne in. Reynolds stiffened. He didn't look at Vance. He looked at Thorne. He saw the posture. He saw the haircut. He saw the eyes. Game recognizes game. "What do we have here, Vance?" Reynolds asked, his voice wary. "Grand larceny, resisting impersonating an officer," Vance announced proudly. "Caught him stealing lumber at Builder's Depot. Tried to flash some fake federal ID to get out of it." Reynolds stood up slowly. He looked at Thorne. "Sir," Thorne looked Reynolds in the eye. "Sergeant, I am Colonel Marcus Thorne, USMC retired. I am the federal veteran liaison for this district. Your officer refused to check my receipt and refused to verify my credentials. He has my wallet in his pocket." The air left the room. Reynolds looked at Vance. "Vance, give me the wallet." Vance rolled his eyes. "Sarge, come on. It's a prop. It looks like—" "Give me the damn wallet, Kyle!" Reynolds roared, slamming his hand on the desk. Vance jumped, startled. He fished the wallet out and tossed it onto the counter. Reynolds opened it. He didn't just glance. He examined. He took out the ID card. He held it up to the light. He ran his thumb over the embossed seal. He looked at the secondary card. Top secret security clearance, Department of Defense. Reynolds went pale. He looked up at Thorne, then at Vance. "Vance," Reynolds said, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you know what a federal liaison does?" Vance shrugged. "Coordinate parades." "They report to the cabinet," Reynolds said, his voice rising. "They have federal law enforcement authority on VA matters. This ID is real. This man is a colonel." Reynolds looked at the handcuffs on Thorne's wrists. "Uncuff him, now." Vance blinked. "But Sarge, the manager said—" "I don't give a damn what the manager said. You arrested a federal official for shopping. Get those cuffs off him before the feds come down here and turn this precinct into a parking lot." Vance fumbled for his keys, his hands suddenly shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. Thorne rubbed his wrists where deep red grooves had formed. He didn't rub them to soothe the pain. He rubbed them to restore circulation. He looked at Vance, who was suddenly looking very small. "I want the station commander," Thorne said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the room. "I want a camera to photograph these injuries, and I want my phone. I need to make a call to Washington." Reynolds picked up the desk phone immediately. "Captain, you need to come down here, now. Yes, it's bad." The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. By the time Thorne left the station 3 hours later, escorted by the captain and 2 lieutenants who were profusely apologizing, the video from the parking lot had already hit the internet. White officer arrests. Black veteran with receipt. Builder's Depot manager calls cops on federal agent. The optics were catastrophic. The footage showed a calm, dignified older man offering proof and a young aggressive officer escalating to violence. It showed the manager Miller smirking. It showed the receipt crumpled on the ground. By Wednesday morning, news trucks were camped out in front of the precinct. The hashtag Colonel Thorne was trending nationwide. The narrative was undeniable. A man who had defended his country abroad was treated like a criminal at home. But the real investigation unearthed the rot beneath the surface. The Internal Affairs review of Officer Vance wasn't just bad. It was damning. 6 prior complaints, all involving black men, all dismissed by his supervisors as unfounded or within policy. There was a pattern of contempt of cop arrests, Vance arresting people not for crimes but for questioning his authority. The investigation into Builder's Depot was equally ruinous. Corporate headquarters panicked. They fired Brett Miller, immediately issuing a statement condemning his failure to follow protocol and gross judgmental error. But the internet doesn't forget. Former employees came forward with stories of Miller's bias, how he followed black customers, how he ignored white contractors who walked out with tools. The store's rating plummeted. People boycotted. Stocks dipped. Marcus Thorne didn't go on TV. He didn't do the talk show circuit. He hired a civil rights attorney, a shark named Eleanor Graves, and they filed a federal lawsuit. The suit named Vance the police department, the city Brett Miller and Builders Depot. The charges were extensive: false arrest, assault, battery, defamation, civil rights violations, malicious prosecution. The discovery phase was a nightmare for the city. Emails surfaced where Vance joked about thugs in the parking lots. Performance reviews showed his sergeant telling him to keep the stats up, but be careful with the cameras. It revealed a culture that rewarded aggression and punished de-escalation. The city attorneys took one look at Thorne's service record, his spotless federal career, and the high-definition video of the arrest, and they waved the white flag. They settled for $6.5 million. Builders Depot settled for an undisclosed amount, rumored to be in the seven figures, along with a commitment to mandatory bias training for all 40,000 employees nationwide. Officer Kyle Vance was fired. But Thorne demanded more than just termination. As part of the settlement, the city was forced to report Vance to the National Decertification Index. He would never be a police officer again. Not in this state, not in any state. At 28, his career in law enforcement was dead. The final chapter played out in City Hall 2 months later. The city council was holding a special hearing on police reform. The room was packed. When Marcus Thorne walked to the podium, the room went silent. He wore a suit, now not work clothes. He looked every inch the statesman. "Council members," Thorne began, his voice steady. "I spent 30 years in the Marine Corps. I learned that authority without discipline is dangerous. I learned that you judge a man by his actions, not his appearance." He paused, looking at the empty chair where the police chief usually sat. The chief had resigned the week prior. "Officer Vance didn't see a colonel. He didn't see a federal liaison. He didn't even see a customer. He saw a stereotype. And because he saw a stereotype, he felt justified in stripping away my rights." Thorne leaned forward. "I have the resources to fight back. I have the badge. I have the lawyers. But what about the young man who doesn't? What about the carpenter who just wants to build a house? If this can happen to me with all my protection, what chance does an ordinary citizen have?" The room remained deadly silent. Thorne's question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. This wasn't just a story about a bad apple. It was a story about the barrel. It was about the permission structure that allowed a 29-year-old manager and a 28-year-old cop to look at a 62-year-old hero and see a threat. Justice was served, yes. The money was paid. The bad actors were removed. But as Thorne walked out of City Hall that day into the bright autumn sun, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. He felt the weight of all the times this had happened before to men who didn't have a silver star to save them. He got into his truck, the same truck from the parking lot, and drove to the veterans' housing site. The plywood was late, but the work had to continue. We have to ask ourselves, why is calm compliance so often interpreted as resistance when it comes from certain people? Should police officers be personally liable for civil rights violations? Or should the taxpayers keep footing the bill? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. These stories are difficult, but ignoring them only guarantees they will happen again. If you believe in accountability, please like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.
Sir, I told you already. You need to leave this property now.
I'm not leaving. I belong here. I haven't broken any law.
You don't get to decide that. Step away from the door and show me ID.
I'm a retired U.S. Army Master Sergeant. I'm standing on a public sidewalk.
I don't care who you think you are.
Then you're about to make the biggest mistake of your career.
Officer Kyle Vance had been wearing the badge of the Metro Police Department for 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his career, humiliate his superiors, and cost the taxpayers of the city $1.9 million. He was 29 years old, fit, aggressive, and entirely convinced that his authority was absolute. On a bright, crisp Tuesday morning outside the Oakwood Community Center, he received a dispatch call regarding a suspicious individual refusing to leave the premises. The suspicious individual was Master Sergeant retired Marcus Thorne, a man who had served the United States Army for 25 years, standing stoically by the entrance with a canvas bag of books and coffee waiting to unlock the doors. What Officer Vance did next, ignoring the man's calm demeanor, dismissing his verbal identification, and physically assaulting a disabled combat veteran in plain view of morning commuters, would become a searing indictment of how quickly protect and serve can curdle into dominate and control. Before we get into the details of this miscarriage of justice, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that our veterans deserve better than handcuffs and pavement, please hit that subscribe button. We need to tell these stories because the mainstream media often moves on too fast, but the scars last a lifetime. The Oakwood Community Center is a brick-and-mortar staple of the neighborhood, sitting squarely on the corner of Elm and Main. It's the heartbeat of the district, a place that hosts everything from morning yoga for seniors to evening town halls. The neighborhood itself is in transition. What used to be a working-class block of row houses is slowly being transformed by developers into condos and high-end retail spaces. New money is moving in, and with it, a new set of expectations about who belongs on the sidewalk and who doesn't. It was 8:45 a.m. The sun was cutting through the maple trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. The morning traffic was steady, people rushing to offices and appointments. Marcus Thorne stood near the double-glass doors of the center. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't lurking. He was standing with his feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the horizon with the patience of a man who had spent days waiting in the desert heat for orders that might never come. He was wearing a clean-pressed pair of cargo pants, a gray polo shirt tucked in with a military web belt, and sturdy hiking boots. At 48 years old, Thorne cut an imposing figure, broad shoulders, a shaved head, and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. But his eyes were calm. He wasn't bothering the pedestrians walking their dogs. He wasn't asking for money. He was simply waiting. The janitor, old Mr. Henderson, was running late with the master alarm code, and Thorne was merely holding the post until he arrived. But to the wrong set of eyes, patience looks like loitering, and silence looks like a threat. Marcus Thorne was not a man who sought attention. For 2.5 decades, he had been a ghost in the machine of the United States military, a master sergeant who specialized in logistics and forward operating base security. He had done 4 tours in Iraq and 3 in Afghanistan. He had organized supply lines under mortar fire in Fallujah. He had negotiated with village elders in the Kandahar province. He had held the hands of 19-year-old boys as they bled out in the sand, promising them that they would not be forgotten. When he retired 3 years ago, he brought home a chest full of medals, including a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star with Valor, and a body held together by surgical pins and sheer willpower. His right shoulder had been shattered by an IED blast in 2014, leaving him with limited range of motion and chronic pain that he managed with meditation and swimming, never opioids. He didn't drink. He didn't complain. He lived a life of regimented simplicity. For the past 10 years, even during his final years of active duty, when he was stationed locally, Thorne had volunteered at the Oakwood Community Center. He ran the Vets for Vets support group every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. It was a lifeline for men and women returning home with ghosts in their heads. Thorne was the rock they clung to. He arrived early every single week to set up the chairs, brew the coffee, and ensure the room was a safe space before the others arrived. He was a fixture. The neighborhood kids knew him as Sarge. The local shop owners waved when he walked by, but neighborhoods change and memory is short. That Tuesday, Thorne had arrived at 8:30 a.m. as usual. He found the doors locked. Mr. Henderson, the custodian who usually unlocked the facility, had called Thorne 10 minutes earlier, apologetic, saying his car wouldn't start and he'd be 20 minutes late. Thorne had told him not to worry. "I'll stand watch, Jim. Get here when you get here." So, Thorne stood watch. He placed his bag on the concrete bench containing the group's sign-in sheets and a bag of premium coffee he bought out of his own pocket, and assumed his waiting stance. He was reviewing the lesson plan for the day in his mind, thinking about how to help a young Marine who had just joined the group deal with his survivor's guilt. He didn't know that 50 feet away through the blinds of the administrative office window he was being watched. He didn't know that his stillness was being interpreted as obstinance. He didn't know that his very presence was about to trigger a chain of events that would expose the ugly underbelly of the safety culture permeating the new Oakwood. Thorne was a man who believed in the chain of command in rules and in the inherent decency of institutions. He believed that if you followed the law, honored your country, and carried yourself with dignity, you would be afforded respect. He was experienced enough to know the world was unfair, but he still held on to the idea that in his own neighborhood, on his own block, his service meant something. He was about to find out that to some people a black man standing still is a crime in itself. Julianne Ebersol had been the operations manager at the Oakwood Community Center for exactly 3 weeks. At 34 years old, she was a whirlwind of new policies, new memos, and a desperate need to prove that she could clean up the place. She had been hired by a board of directors that wanted to modernize the center to make it more appealing to the affluent families moving into the newly renovated lofts downtown. Julianne took that mandate seriously. She saw herself not just as an administrator, but as the guardian of the neighborhood's aesthetic. She didn't know the history of the place. She didn't know the regulars. She didn't know Marcus Thorne. What she saw through her window was a large, muscular black man in paramilitary clothing standing right by the front door. He hadn't moved in 15 minutes. He wasn't looking at a phone. He was just standing there staring out at the street. To Julianne, whose previous experience was in managing high-end HOA properties in the suburbs, this was a red flag. This was blight. This was a deterrent to the mothers with strollers who would be arriving for the 10 o'clock a.m. tumble tots class. She watched him for another 5 minutes, her anxiety spiraling into a narrative of danger. Why is he just standing there? Is he casing the building? Is he on drugs? He looks intense. In her mind, Thorne wasn't a veteran waiting for a key. He was a vagrant staking a claim. She convinced herself that she had seen him scowl at a passerby, though Thorne had merely squinted against the sun. Julianne didn't walk outside to ask him if he needed help. She didn't open the door to ask his business. That would require confronting her own discomfort. Instead, she chose the path of least resistance and maximum escalation. She picked up the phone. 911, what is your emergency? This isn't an emergency, but I need an officer at the Oakwood Community Center immediately. Julianne said, her voice trembling with a manufactured fear she had talked herself into. There is a man refusing to leave the entrance. He's blocking the doors. Is he aggressive, ma'am? Is he armed? He looks very aggressive. Julianne lied, justifying it to herself as a preventative measure. He's a very large man dressed in military-style clothes. He's been loitering here for half an hour. I'm afraid to open the doors for the staff. He looks like he might be mentally unstable. Has he threatened anyone? He's making people uncomfortable, Julianne said, using the magic words that she knew would trigger a response. Parents are trying to drop off kids and they are scared to walk past him. That was another lie. There were no parents yet. The Tumble Tots class didn't start for an hour. But Julianne needed him gone, and she needed the police to prioritize it. Okay, ma'am. We have an officer in the vicinity. We'll send someone over to remove him. Julianne hung up, feeling a surge of righteous accomplishment. She was protecting her facility. She was doing her job. She peeked through the blinds again. Thorne hadn't moved. He was just breathing the morning air, oblivious to the fact that his description, large black male military clothing, aggressive possible mental health issue, was currently being beamed to a patrol car 2 blocks away. Officer Kyle Vance heard the dispatch and felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. Aggressive male, refusing to leave, scaring women and children. This was the kind of call Vance liked. It was straightforward. It required a show of force. Vance was not a bad cop in his own eyes. He saw himself as a sheepdog. The world was full of wolves, and it was his job to bark and bite until the wolves ran away. But in his 6 years on the force, his definition of a wolf had become dangerously broad. He had accumulated 14 complaints in his short career. Most were for discourtesy or unprofessional conduct. 2 were for excessive force. All of them had been dismissed or resulted in minor counseling. The department knew Vance was a hothead. His sergeant had told him twice to dial it back. But his arrest numbers were high. He cleared corners. He made the stats look good. And in a department that was understaffed and overworked, results often mattered more than methods. Vance had a specific view of the district he patrolled. He believed that order was maintained through dominance. If you gave an inch, they took a mile. If you let a guy loiter today, tomorrow he's selling drugs, and the day after that he's breaking windows. Broken windows policing was his Bible, but he read it with a heavy accent on the punishment and very little on the community. He pulled his cruiser up to the curb in front of the community center at 8:53 a.m. He didn't park in a spot. He pulled up diagonally, blocking the view, establishing territory. He stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his utility belt. He didn't put his hat on. He wanted to look ready for a fight. He saw the suspect immediately. Thorne matched the description perfectly. Big guy, cargo pants, standing like a statue. Vance didn't see a disciplined soldier. He saw a defiant thug who thought he owned the sidewalk. He didn't see the calm posture. He saw the 1,000-yard stare of someone on something or someone looking for trouble. Vance didn't start with a good morning. He didn't start with, "Can I help you?" He walked around the front of his cruiser, his hand resting instinctively near his holster, his chest puffed out. He had already decided how this interaction was going to go. The subject was going to submit, or the subject was going to be made to submit. He walked fast, closing the distance, aggressively invading Thorne's personal space before a word was spoken. This was a tactic Vance used often: shock and awe. Make them back up, make them flinch. But Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He simply turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Vance's sunglasses. He watched the officer approach with the same detached assessment he had used to watch convoys approaching a checkpoint, and that lack of fear was the first thing that offended Officer Vance. "You need to move along, pal. You can't be here," Vance barked, stopping 3 feet from Thorne's face. Thorne didn't break his stance. He kept his hands clasped behind his back. He spoke in a deep, resonant baritone that carried no anger, only authority. "Good morning, officer. I am waiting for the facility to open." "Did you hear me? I said move along. We got calls. You're scaring the staff. You're trespassing on private property." "This is a public community center, officer, and I am not trespassing. I am a volunteer and a key holder. The custodian is late." Thorne nodded toward the glass doors. "If you check with the administration." "I don't need to check anything," Vance interrupted, stepping closer. "The manager called it in. She wants you gone. That means you're gone. Now take a walk before I write you up for loitering." Thorne took a slow breath. He recognized the type. He had seen young lieutenants like this in the desert, arrogant, eager for action, and dangerous because they didn't know what they didn't know. "Officer, my name is Marcus Thorne. I am a retired master sergeant. I run the Veterans Support Group here every Tuesday at 0900. I am not leaving my post because a manager I have never met is confused." "Oh, you're a lawyer now. You're a sergeant," Vance sneered. He hated when suspects claimed status. "I don't care if you're the Joint Chiefs of Staff. When I tell you to move, you move. Let me see some ID." "I am not required to show you identification. I have committed no crime. I am standing on a public sidewalk." "Failure to identify. Disobeying a lawful order." Vance recited, his voice rising, playing to the invisible audience he imagined was cheering him on. "You're making this difficult, Marcus. Is that your name, Marcus? My name is Mr. Thorne to you, officer." Vance's face flushed red. The lack of submission was eating at him. He was losing control of the dynamic, and his only tool for regaining it was escalation. "Last chance. Get your hands out from behind your back and show me ID or you're going for a ride." Thorne remained perfectly still. "I have a bag on the bench there. My wallet is inside. I am happy to show you my ID if you ask me respectfully and acknowledge that I have a right to be here, but I will not be bullied off this corner like a criminal." "That's it," Vance snapped. "You're under arrest for trespassing and disorderly conduct." "Disorderly?" Thorne raised an eyebrow. "I haven't moved an inch." "Turn around, hands on your head." Vance reached out and grabbed Thorne's right shoulder, the shoulder that had been reconstructed with titanium and screws. Thorne winced, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth as the nerve pain shot down his arm. "Watch the shoulder, officer. I have a combat injury." "Stop resisting," Vance yelled, though Thorne hadn't moved. The officer interpreted the wince as resistance. He yanked the arm harder, twisting it behind Thorne's back with unnecessary torque. "I am not resisting," Thorne said through gritted teeth, his voice straining but still controlled. "You are hurting a disabled veteran. You are making a mistake that you cannot undo." "Shut up." Vance shoved Thorne against the brick wall of the center. "Spread 'em." By now, the commotion had drawn attention. 2 women from the accounting firm next door had stopped on the sidewalk. A delivery driver had pulled over, and inside the community center, the front door clicked open. It wasn't Julianne Ebersol. It was Mrs. Gable, the 60-year-old receptionist who had known Thorne for a decade. She stepped out, her eyes widening in horror. Behind her was a young man, a summer intern who immediately pulled out his smartphone. "Officer, stop!" Mrs. Gable shouted, rushing toward them. "That is Mr. Thorne. He works here." Vance ignored her. He was in the tunnel now. He had the cuffs out. He slapped one onto Thorne's right wrist and wrenched the left arm back. Thorne groaned a low, guttural sound of pain as the metal bit into his skin and his shoulder joint screamed in protest. "Back off, lady," Vance yelled over his shoulder. "This subject is under arrest." "He's not a subject," Mrs. Gable screamed, tears forming in her eyes. "He's a hero. He's waiting for the meeting. Julianne, tell him." Julianne Ebersol had emerged from the door looking pale. She saw the scene. The aggressive man was being handcuffed, but he wasn't fighting. He was calm, and the receptionist was screaming in his defense. Julianne realized with a sinking feeling in her gut that she had miscalculated, but she was too proud to admit it. She stood frozen in the doorway, saying nothing. "I am complying," Thorne said loud enough for the intern's phone to pick up. "I am Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne. I am not resisting. This officer is injuring my surgically repaired shoulder. I am asking you to loosen the cuffs." "Tell it to the judge," Vance grunted. He double-locked the cuffs tight. He patted Thorne down roughly, pulling the wallet from the bag on the bench and shoving it into his own pocket without looking at it. He spun Thorne around. "You're making a scene, you know that," Vance said, panting slightly from the exertion. Thorne looked Vance in the eye. The veteran's face was covered in a sheen of sweat from the pain, but his gaze was unbroken. "I didn't make the scene, officer. You did. And this video," he nodded toward the intern, "is going to end your career. Get in the car." Vance shoved him toward the cruiser. He forced Thorne's large frame into the back seat, bending his head down roughly. Thorne had to twist his body to protect his shoulder, gasping as he sat on the hard plastic seat. Vance slammed the door. He walked around to the driver's side, feeling a moment of triumph. He had cleared the corner. He had won. He looked at the crowd gathering on the sidewalk, Mrs. Gable crying, the intern filming the delivery driver, shaking his head, and he felt a flicker of doubt. But he crushed it. He was the law. The law is never wrong. He got in radioed that he had one in custody and pulled away from the curb, leaving the veteran's bag of books and coffee sitting on the bench like a tombstone. The ride to the 4th precinct took 15 minutes. Thorne sat in the back practicing tactical breathing. In through the nose for 4, hold for 4, out, through the mouth for 4. He needed to manage the pain in his shoulder, which was now a throbbing fire. He needed to keep his heart rate down. He knew that any outburst now would be used against him. He remained silent. Vance glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting the suspect to be cursing, kicking the doors, or begging. The silence unnerved him. "Quiet back there. I realized you screwed up." Thorne said nothing. They arrived at the station. Vance pulled Thorne out of the car and marched him into the booking area. The precinct was busy. Phones were ringing. Officers were typing reports. At the main desk sat Desk Sergeant Miller, a 55-year-old veteran of the force with gray hair and a mustache that had seen 3 decades of city history. "What do we have, Vance?" Miller asked, not looking up from his paperwork. "Trespassing, disorderly, refusing to ID, resisting..." Vance rattled off the charges, pushing Thorne toward the counter. Miller looked up. He saw the man in handcuffs. He saw the military bearing. He saw the scar on the neck. He saw the pained grimace that the man was trying to hide. "Refusing to ID?" Miller asked, looking at Thorne. "Sir, do you have identification?" "It is in my wallet." Thorne said, his voice raspy. "Officer Vance confiscated it. It is in his pocket." Miller held out his hand to Vance. "Give me the wallet." Vance handed it over. He wouldn't show it at the scene. He was being difficult. Miller opened the worn leather bifold. The first thing he saw was not a driver's license. It was a retired military identification card. Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne, U.S. Army. Below that was another card, City Council Veterans Advisory Board, board member. And tucked behind that was a folded copy of his VA disability rating 100% service-connected. Miller's face went white. He looked from the ID to Thorne, then to Vance. "Vance," Miller said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You arrested Marcus Thorne." "I don't know, is that his name?" "He was loitering at the community center." "He's on the city council board, you idiot," Miller hissed. "He runs the support group there. We send our own guys to him for counseling." Vance froze. The manager called. She said he was threatening." Miller ignored Vance. He came around the desk, moving faster than he had in years. "Uncuff him. Now." "Sarge," he resisted. "I said uncuff him right now." Miller roared, silencing the entire room. Every officer stopped what they were doing. Vance fumbled for his keys. He unlocked the cuffs. Thorne brought his arms forward, slowly groaning as the blood rushed back. His wrists were deeply indented and bruised. "Mr. Thorne," Miller said, his tone apologetic and horrified. "I am incredibly sorry. I know who you are. I know your service." Thorne rubbed his wrists. He looked at Vance, who was standing there pale and shrinking. "Sergeant Miller," Thorne said calmly, "I need medical attention for my shoulder, and I want to file a formal complaint against this officer for assault, false imprisonment, and violation of my civil rights. I also want his body camera footage secured immediately." "It's already done," Miller said. He looked at Vance with a look of absolute disgust. "Vance, put your badge and gun on the counter. You're going into the captain's office. Don't speak to anyone." Vance looked at the wallet on the desk. He looked at the man he had called a thug. He realized with a nausea that hit him like a wave that the wolf he thought he had caught was actually a lion. And the lion was about to eat him alive. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The video taken by the intern hit social media before Thorne had even left the hospital. It showed everything. The calm veteran, the hysterical manager in the doorway, the aggressive officer twisting the arm of a man who wasn't fighting back. The headline wrote itself, "Hero Handcuffed Cop Assaults Disabled Vet at Community Center." By 5:00 p.m. that Tuesday, protesters had gathered outside the Oakwood Community Center. By Wednesday morning, Julianne Ebersol was fired. The board of directors released a statement condemning her racial bias and lack of judgment. She tried to sue for wrongful termination, but the discovery phase revealed her text messages to a friend describing Thorne as a scary stray, which sealed her fate in the court of public opinion. Officer Kyle Vance was placed on unpaid suspension. The internal affairs investigation was concluded in record time, largely because Master Sergeant Thorne testified with the precision of a man who had written thousands of incident reports. Vance was fired 3 weeks later. The chief of police personally apologized to Thorne, but the apology didn't fix the torn rotator cuff that required another surgery to repair. Thorne sued the city and the police department. He didn't do it for the money. He did it to force a change in policy. The lawsuit exposed the pattern of complaints against Vance that had been ignored. It exposed the lack of de-escalation training. The city settled for $1.9 million to avoid a trial that would have been a public relations massacre. Marcus Thorne donated a significant portion of the settlement to the Vets for Vets program, ensuring it had permanent funding. He returned to the community center the very next Tuesday, his arm in a sling to unlock the doors. But the story isn't just about the money or the firing. It's about the silence that fell over the neighborhood. The realization that for all our flags and bumper stickers supporting the troops, we still judge a book by its cover. We still allow fear to dictate how we treat our neighbors. Marcus Thorne stood on that corner for 25 years defending the Constitution. He stood there that Tuesday defending his dignity. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a man with a chest full of medals, a spotless record, and the patience of a saint can be treated like a criminal on a sunny Tuesday morning, what happens to the young man who doesn't have the rank? What happens to the person who can't remain calm while their arm is being twisted? Justice was served in the end, but the scar remains, not just on Marcus Thorne's shoulder, but on the conscience of a community that had to ask itself, who are we really protecting, and who are we afraid of? Do you think the settlement was enough? Or should Officer Vance have faced criminal charges for assault? And do you think managers like Julianne should be personally liable for making false reports? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you appreciate us bringing you the truth behind the headlines, please like and subscribe. It helps us keep the lights on and the stories coming. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for each other.
The incident review concludes here. To support continued transparency, kindly like and subscribe. We appreciate you watching Bodycam Incident Reports.